Ethan Carter entered into the luxury boutique, his designer shoes clicking against the polished floor. As he browsed, his eyes landed on a huge black man examining an expensive watch. With a smirk, he scoffed, "I think blacks are not allowed here." A few customers chuckled, encouraging his arrogance. But when the man turned, standing tall and powerful, and the moment their eyes met, the blood drained from Ethan's face. Before continuing this amazing story, let us know where are you watching from. Also, subscribe to the channel for daily upcoming stories. Let's begin the story. Ethan Carter lived in a world of polished marble floors, imported Italian leather, and cars that cost more than some people's homes. At just 17, he had everything, except humility. He stood in front of his full-length mirror, adjusting the cuffs of his designer blazer. His thick brown hair was perfectly styled, and his emerald green eyes gleamed with the self-assurance of someone who had never faced true hardship. Dressed in a tailored navy blue suit, a Rolex glinting on his wrist, and custom sneakers that cost more than a month's rent for most people, he smirked. His bedroom looked more like a luxury hotel suite than a teenager's space. A king-size bed draped in silk sheets, a massive TV mounted on the wall, and a walk-in closet filled with expensive brands. The only thing out of place was a dusty old rocking chair in the corner, a relic from his childhood that his Grandma Rose had insisted on keeping. His father, William Carter, was one of the most powerful businessmen in the state, the CEO of Carter Enterprises. His mother, Victoria, spent her time attending charity galas and spa retreats, though she rarely had time for actual charity, or her son. Despite being surrounded by wealth, Ethan had a restless energy, a hunger to prove his superiority over others. To him, money wasn't just power, it was his identity. The Carter Mansion was a modern architectural masterpiece, sitting atop a hill with a view of the entire city. The dining room, where Ethan and his parents had breakfast, had a 12-foot chandelier, a marble dining table, and a team of chefs ensuring no one had to lift a finger. Ethan scrolled through his phone, barely paying attention to his meal. A butler placed a plate of smoked salmon and avocado toast in front of him. "Eat, Ethan," his mother said absently, flipping through a fashion magazine. "You have a long day of shopping ahead." His father, a tall, stern-looking man with graying hair, sipped his espresso. "Remember, son, how you present yourself is everything. People respect power. Make sure they see you as someone important." Ethan nodded, smirking. He already knew that. Later that afternoon, Ethan arrived at Madison & Company, one of the most exclusive luxury boutiques in the city. The boutique was known for its exquisite men's fashion, catering to the rich and famous. Ethan walked in with his friends, Dylan and Lucas, both from wealthy families like his own. They strutted past the store employees as if they owned the place, their confidence bordering on arrogance. "I need a new Rolex," Ethan announced. "Something that screams power." The sales associate, a young woman in a sleek black dress, smiled nervously. "Of course, Mr. Carter. Right this way." As they walked toward the watch display, Ethan noticed a large man browsing the store. He was dressed casually, wearing a simple white long-sleeve shirt and loose blue pants with a neatly trimmed gray beard. His massive frame made him look imposing, but his posture was relaxed. Ethan frowned. This guy didn't belong here. He looked like someone who had wandered in by mistake, someone who couldn't afford a single item in this store. With a smug grin, Ethan nudged his friends. "Look at that guy. Think he even knows what a Rolex is?" Dylan chuckled. "Probably looking for the clearance section. Oh wait, there isn't one." Lucas laughed. "Maybe he got lost on the way to Walmart." Ethan smirked, loudly clearing his throat to get the man's attention. "Hey buddy, you sure you're in the right place? This store doesn't do discount sales." His friends burst into laughter. The store employees shifted uncomfortably, but no one intervened. The large man slowly turned to face Ethan, his expression unreadable. His deep, steady gaze made Ethan feel uneasy for the first time. Then, the store manager rushed over, her face turning pale. "Mr. O'Neill, it's an honor to have you here." Ethan's heart stopped. His smirk vanished. His body stiffened. "Wait, Mr. O'Neill? As in, Shaquille O'Neal? The Shaquille O'Neal? The basketball legend? The multimillionaire businessman? The celebrity who could probably buy this entire store if he wanted to?" The air felt heavy. Ethan's face turned red. He had just mocked one of the most respected athletes in the world. Shaq didn't need to say a word. His calm yet intimidating presence was enough. Ethan froze, realizing that for the first time in his life, he had just made a huge mistake. The boutique, once buzzing with quiet conversations and the soft clicking of heels on marble, fell into complete silence. Ethan stood frozen, his smirk wiped clean off his face. His friends, Dylan and Lucas, exchanged nervous glances, the laughter dying in their throats. Shaquille O'Neal didn't move. He didn't have to. His presence alone was enough to shift the entire atmosphere of the room. The store manager, a petite woman in her 40s, looked as though she might faint. "Mr. O'Neill, I'm so sorry for the misunderstanding," she stammered, glancing at Ethan as if she wanted to throw him out herself. Shaq finally spoke, his deep, calm voice carrying across the boutique. "Misunderstanding, huh?" His eyes locked onto Ethan, unreadable yet piercing. Ethan's throat went dry. It was one thing to mock a random stranger. It was another thing to realize that the man he had just insulted was one of the most respected athletes and businessmen alive. Ethan started, but his voice cracked. He cleared his throat, scrambling to recover. "Man, I was just joking," he forced out, flashing his usual cocky grin. "Didn't know it was you." Shaq raised an eyebrow. "Oh? So it's okay to look down on people as long as they're not famous?" The words landed like a punch to the gut. Lucas and Dylan, who had been backing Ethan up just moments ago, suddenly found their shoes very interesting. Ethan swallowed, shifting uncomfortably. "No, I didn't." Shaq shook his head, a slight smirk tugging at the corner of his lips. "You remind me of some guys I knew back in high school," he said, turning to the store manager. "Cocky, thinking they're better than everyone, talking loud but got nothing to back it up." A low chuckle rippled through the boutique. Some customers, recognizing the moment for what it was, were trying not to laugh outright. Ethan's ears burned. His hands clenched into fists, but he knew he couldn't say anything. Not here. Not in front of Shaquille freaking O'Neal. "You know," Shaq continued, looking back at Ethan, "I was just going to buy a watch today, but now I feel like teaching a lesson instead." Ethan stiffened. "Lesson?" Shaq nodded toward the store manager. "You got a private lounge in here?" Yes, of course, Mr. O'Neill." "Good, I'll take the kid." Ethan's stomach dropped. What? The back of the boutique held a VIP lounge, a space designed for the wealthiest clients. It was filled with leather sofas, a mahogany coffee table, and shelves lined with expensive whiskey bottles. Not that Ethan could drink any of them yet. Shaq took a seat, his towering frame making the couch look small. He gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit." Ethan hesitated. He didn't like being told what to do. But the weight of the moment forced him down. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't in control. Shaq leaned back, studying him. "Let me ask you something," he said. "Who are you?" Ethan blinked. "What?" "You heard me. Who are you?" Ethan frowned. "I'm Ethan Carter." Shaq nodded. "Okay. And who's Ethan Carter?" Ethan exhaled sharply. "My dad is William Carter. He owns Carter Enterprises. My family is—" Shaq held up a hand, cutting him off. "I didn't ask who your daddy is. I asked who you are." Ethan opened his mouth, then shut it. For the first time in his life, he had no answer. Shaq smiled knowingly. See, kid? That's the problem. You don't even know who you are without your daddy's money. Ethan clenched his jaw. I don't need to prove anything to you. Shaq chuckled. Oh, you do. You just don't know it yet. He leaned forward, resting his massive arms on his knees. You think money makes you better than people? Let me tell you something. I grew up in a small apartment with my mom and stepdad. Had one pair of shoes. Knew what it was like to go to bed hungry. But even back then, I knew what respect meant. You got everything handed to you, but you don't even know how to be a decent human being. Ethan gritted his teeth. I don't need a lecture. Shaq smirked. Oh, you do, but I ain't done yet. He leaned back again, stretching his arms. You know what my mom always told me? It ain't about what you got, it's about how you treat people. And right now, you ain't doing too great, kid. Ethan swallowed. His whole life, no one had ever talked to him like this. Shaq stood up. Here's what we're gonna do. Ethan raised an eyebrow. What? You're gonna come with me, Shaq said. Spend a day in my world. See life outside this little bubble you live in. Ethan frowned. Why would I do that? Shaq smiled. Because right now, you don't got a choice. Ethan's face twisted in frustration. He wanted to refuse, wanted to walk out and pretend this never happened. But the look on Shaq's face told him he wasn't getting out of this. Shaq patted him on the back. Don't worry, kid. By the time I'm done with you, you'll actually know who you are. Ethan swallowed hard. For the first time in his life. He wasn't sure he was ready to find out. Ethan stormed out of the VIP lounge, his fists clenched. He didn't like being cornered, and he definitely didn't like being forced into anything. Dylan and Lucas were waiting outside, looking like they had just witnessed a ghost. Dude, what the hell just happened? Lucas whispered. Ethan exhaled sharply. Nothing. Just forget it. But forgetting wasn't an option, because Shaquille O'Neal was right behind him. All right, kid, let's go. Ethan turned to face him. Go where? Shaq smirked. You'll see. A sleek black Escalade was already waiting outside the boutique. The driver, a broad-shouldered man in a suit, stepped out and opened the door. Ethan hesitated. I have my own car. Shaq shrugged. Then drive, but I guarantee you ain't got the address. Ethan glared at him, but there was no way out. He shot his friends a look. I'll call you guys later. Yeah, good luck, man, Dylan muttered. Lucas just shook his head. Ethan slid into the SUV, crossing his arms as Shaq followed. The door shut, and within seconds they were on the road. He sighed. Can you at least tell me where we're going? Shaq smiled. You ever been outside your little rich boy world? Ethan scoffed. Of course. I've been to anywhere that wasn't luxury resorts, first-class flights, or five-star restaurants. Ethan shut his mouth. Shaq chuckled. Yeah, that's what I thought. The city skyline began to change. Glass skyscrapers faded into older buildings, some with peeling paint, others with bars over the windows. The streets weren't lined with designer stores anymore. Instead, they passed corner shops, run-down apartments, and kids playing basketball on cracked concrete courts. Ethan frowned. Where are we? Shaq's expression turned serious. Welcome to my world, kid. The SUV pulled up beside a chain-link fence surrounding a basketball court. The pavement was cracked, the hoops rusted. A group of kids, some wearing hand-me-down sneakers, were playing a heated game. Ethan's face twisted. You seriously brought me to a basketball court? Shaq ignored him, stepping out. The second the kids saw him, their faces lit up. Yo, that's Shaq. Big Diesel in the house. Shaq grinned and dapped up a teenage boy. What's up, Darnell? The boy, no older than 14, nodded. "Just hoopin', man. We've been waiting for you." Ethan watched, arms still crossed. He felt out of place. He had played basketball before, but only at his private country club, where the courts were pristine and the air smelled like freshly cut grass. This question mark. This was different. Shaq turned to him. "You play?" Ethan scoffed. "Yeah, but not here." Shaq laughed. "Then today's your lucky day." He grabbed a ball and bounced it toward Ethan. Ethan caught it, but he didn't move. Shaq smirked. "What's wrong? Afraid you'll lose?" Ethan narrowed his eyes. "Please, I can handle a street game." Darnell and the other kids exchanged glances. "Aight then, rich boy," Darnell said. "Let's see what you got." Ethan rolled his shoulders. He'd played against private school teams, elite trainers, and top-tier AAU players. How hard could this be? Turns out, harder than he thought. The game started fast. Ethan tried to use his fancy dribbling skills, but Darnell stole the ball in seconds. Laughter erupted from the sidelines. "Yo, he ain't ready. Man got all that money but no handles." Ethan's face burned. He tightened his grip and got back on defense. But these kids were different. They didn't play slow, calculated basketball like the private school leagues. They played fast, gritty, aggressive. They played to survive. Darnell hit him with a crossover so quick, Ethan's knees almost buckled. The crowd exploded. Shaq laughed. "Oh, he got you good, kid." Ethan clenched his jaw. He tried to go for a layup, but his shot was blocked, badly. He fell onto the concrete, his palms scraping against the rough pavement. Darnell leaned over him, grinning. "Welcome to the real world, bro." Ethan's hands trembled as he stood up. His pride was in shambles. Shaq stepped onto the court, placing a massive hand on Ethan's shoulder. "You know, I used to play right here when I was your age," he said. "Didn't have trainers, didn't have fancy courts, but I had heart. And that's what you don't got, kid." Ethan swallowed hard. For the first time in his life, he wasn't the best at something. As the sun dipped below the horizon, Ethan sat on the sidelines, sweaty, sore, and silent. Shaq sat beside him. "You mad?" Ethan exhaled. "I don't get it." Shaq nodded. "You don't get a lot of things." Ethan frowned. "Why did you bring me here?" Shaq leaned back. "Because you think money makes you better. You think life's easy because your daddy paid for everything. But out here?" He gestured at the court. "These kids don't got second chances. They mess up. They don't get to run back to a mansion. They learn fast, or they lose." Ethan stared at the court. Darnell and the others were still playing, laughing despite their worn-out shoes, despite their struggles. They had something he didn't. Resilience. Shaq patted his shoulder. "Lesson's just starting, kid." Ethan turned to him, finally asking the question that had been gnawing at him. "Why do you care?" Shaq smiled. "Because somebody once did this for me." Ethan blinked. "Who?" Shaq looked up at the darkening sky. His voice softened. "My stepdad. He made sure I didn't turn into you." Ethan felt something shift inside him. For the first time, he realized he wasn't as untouchable as he thought. And maybe, just maybe, he didn't know everything after all. As the SUV pulled away from the court, Ethan stared out the window, his mind racing. His hand still stung from the fall, his pride even more so. Shaq had taken him out of his world and dropped him into a place he never thought he'd see. And now he felt small. "Where are we going now?" he muttered. Shaq glanced at him. "Dinner." Ethan perked up slightly. "Finally. At least that's something I can enjoy." Shaq chuckled, but didn't say a word. 15 minutes later, they pulled up to a tiny, run-down diner on the corner of a street lined with flickering streetlights. The sign above the entrance read, Mama D's home cooking, but the neon lights were half burnt out. Ethan frowned. "This is where we're eating?" Shaq opened the door. "Got a problem?" Ethan hesitated, but when Shaq got out, he had no choice but to follow. Inside, the place was small, warm, and crowded. The air smelled like fried chicken, collard greens, and cornbread. The customers were mostly working-class folks, laughing and talking over steaming plates of food. A short, elderly black woman behind the counter beamed when she saw Shaq. "Well, if it ain't my favorite big old baby," Shaq grinned. "Mama D." He leaned over the counter and gave her a gentle hug. Ethan blinked. Shaq knew the owner. Mama D looked Ethan up and down. "Who's this lost rich boy?" Ethan bristled. "Ethan," Mama D chuckled. "Well, Ethan, you ever had real food before? Or just them overpriced fancy plates with 3 bites on them?" Ethan flushed. "I eat just fine," Shaq smirked. "We'll see about that." They sat at a small wooden table. The waitress, a young woman in her 20s, brought out heaping plates of food. Fried chicken, mac and cheese, yams, collard greens, cornbread. Ethan stared. "That's a lot," Shaq laughed. "Boy, this is a snack compared to what I used to eat here." Ethan hesitated before picking up his fork. His usual meals were plated like artwork, tiny portions, perfect presentation. But this was messy, homemade, real. He took a bite of the mac and cheese, and his eyes widened. It was incredible. Mama D grinned from the counter. "Told you, baby, we don't miss in here." For the first time that day, Ethan smiled. Maybe not everything outside his world was bad. As they ate, Ethan noticed something. People kept stopping by their table. Not for autographs, not for pictures, just to talk. "Shaq, man, my son just got his first scholarship offer. Thanks for talking to him last year." "Big man, you still helping out at the community center?" "Shaq, appreciate you covering Ms. Johnson's rent last month. She was struggling." Ethan listened, confused. "Wait," he said finally. "You just help people like this?" Shaq wiped his mouth. "Why wouldn't I?" Ethan frowned. "Because, they're not..." Shaq raised an eyebrow. "Not what?" Ethan stopped himself. He had almost said, "Not your responsibility." Shaq sighed. "You ever think about who keeps your world running, kid?" Ethan frowned. "What do you mean?" Shaq gestured around the diner. "The janitors who clean your school? The cooks who make your food? The drivers? The cashiers? The workers you never even look at?" Ethan shifted uncomfortably. Shaq leaned in. "Without them, your world falls apart." Ethan swallowed hard. He had never thought about it like that. Shaq sat back. "That's the problem with kids like you. You think money makes you better. But real strength? That comes from the people who grind every day, just to make it to the next." Ethan looked down at his plate. For the first time, he felt ashamed. After dinner, they stepped outside. The night air was cool, but the streets were still alive with energy. Ethan shoved his hands in his pockets. "So what now? Another life lesson?" Shaq smirked. "You catch on quick." They walked a few blocks. The stores were different here. Small shops, corner stores, laundromats. A man sat outside one of them, playing a saxophone, a small cup in front of him. Ethan froze. His jacket, the one he had bought earlier, cost more than this man would probably make all week. Shaq noticed his expression. "You uncomfortable?" Ethan hesitated. I don't get why people live like this." Shaq's face darkened. "They don't choose it, kid." They passed a group of teenagers outside a bodega. One of them, a tall boy with tired eyes, leaned against the wall. His hoodie was worn out, his sneakers barely held together. Shaq nodded toward him. "See that kid?" Ethan nodded. "His name's Jamal. Smart as hell. But his mom works 2 jobs, and his little sister's sick. He don't got tutors. He don't got college funds. He's got survival. That's it. Ethan's stomach tightened. Shaq sighed. The world you live in, it's a bubble. Out here, this is real life. Ethan looked at the street, the people, the faces that told 1,000 stories, and for the first time, he wanted to listen. As they drove back toward Ethan's neighborhood, he was silent. Shaq glanced at him. You good? Ethan nodded slowly. Yeah, just thinking. Shaq smiled. Good. Means you're learning. Ethan hesitated. Why did you do all this for me? Shaq's face softened. Because, kid, you remind me of someone I used to know. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Who? Shaq's eyes darkened. A kid who had everything, but didn't appreciate any of it. Ethan stared out the window. His house was coming into view. Huge, gated, perfect. For the first time, it didn't feel as big as it used to. Ethan stepped out of the SUV and onto his perfectly paved driveway. The massive front doors of his house loomed over him, a symbol of everything he once thought mattered. Now, it just felt hollow. The moment he walked inside, his mother, Victoria Carter, greeted him with her usual cold perfection. There you are, she said, barely glancing up from her tablet. Did you have fun playing around with your new charity case? Ethan flinched. His father, Richard Carter, sat in the grand living room, swirling a glass of expensive bourbon. Did Shaq take you shopping at Walmart? He chuckled. Ethan gritted his teeth. A week ago, he would have laughed along. But now, their words made his stomach turn. Yeah, Ethan muttered. Something like that. Victoria sighed. Well, at least you got it out of your system. Tomorrow we're going to the country club. Can we not? Ethan cut her off. His mother's eyebrows shot up. Excuse me? I don't feel like it. His father scoffed. Ethan, don't start acting difficult. You have a reputation to maintain. A reputation? Ethan clenched his jaw. What did that even mean anymore? Without another word, he turned and headed upstairs. Ethan shut the door to his room and collapsed onto his bed. His massive, custom-designed room, filled with everything a teenager could want, big screen TV, designer sneakers, gaming setup, felt smaller than ever. His eyes landed on his new designer jacket, the one he had bought just hours ago. It cost more than some people made in months. He thought of Jamal, standing outside that bodega in worn-out sneakers. He thought of Mama D, cooking for her community while his mother wouldn't lift a finger in the kitchen. He thought of Shaq, who had everything, yet still chose to give so much away. And then he thought of himself. What had he ever done for anyone? For the first time in his life, Ethan felt disgusted by his own reflection. The next day, Ethan's friends convinced him to go to a party at Landon's house. It was the same as always. Rich kids, expensive drinks, music blasting from speakers that cost more than some people's cars. Normally, Ethan would have been in the center of it all, laughing, drinking, showing off. But tonight, he didn't belong. Yo, Ethan, Landon slung an arm around him. You good, man? You've been quiet. Ethan forced a smile. Yeah, just thinking. Landon smirked. About what? That Walmart trip with Shaq? A few people nearby laughed. Ethan tensed. Landon continued, oblivious. I swear, that dude's like obsessed with poor people. Like, we get it, man. Not everyone can be rich. Shut up, Landon, Ethan snapped. The laughter stopped instantly. Landon blinked. Dude, what? Ethan stepped back, shaking his head. Never mind. He turned and walked out. For the first time, his world felt fake. Ethan sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel. His entire life had been about status, wealth, image. And for the first time, none of it mattered. His phone buzzed. Grandma rose. Ethan exhaled and answered. "Hey, Grandma." Her warm voice wrapped around him like a hug. "Ethan, darling, I haven't heard from you in days. Are you all right?" Ethan hesitated. "I don't know." A pause. Then gently, "Do you want to talk about it?" Ethan swallowed the lump in his throat. "Yeah," he whispered. "I think I do." Ethan drove to his grandmother's house, his mind racing. For the first time in his life, he felt like he was standing on the edge of two different worlds. One where he had spent his entire life, filled with wealth, status, and entitlement, and another that he barely understood, but somehow felt realer. And he had no idea where he belonged. By the time he pulled into Grandma Rose's driveway, the weight in his chest was unbearable. The house was small but cozy, with a front porch where she loved to sit and drink tea. Unlike the cold, museum-like mansion he lived in, this house felt warm, lived in. The porch light flicked on, and Grandma Rose opened the door before he even knocked. "I knew you'd come," she said with a small smile. Ethan exhaled and stepped inside. Grandma Rose's kitchen smelled like cinnamon and honey, a familiar scent that instantly made Ethan feel like a little boy again. She poured him a cup of herbal tea, something she always said was good for the soul, and sat across from him. "So," she said gently, "tell me what's on your heart." Ethan stared into his tea, unsure where to start. I don't know who I am anymore," he admitted. Grandma Rose nodded, as if she already knew. "Something changed in you, didn't it?" she said. "What happened?" Ethan took a deep breath. "I met people who don't have what I have, but somehow they seem happier. They care about things that I never even thought about. And I feel like I've been blind my whole life." Grandma Rose studied him carefully. "And that scares you?" Ethan nodded. "It's like I'm seeing my parents, my friends, my life differently, and I don't like what I see." Grandma Rose reached across the table and gently squeezed his hand. "That's called waking up," she said. Ethan frowned. "Waking up?" Grandma Rose leaned back, a distant look in her eyes. "When I was your age, I had a friend named Marla. She didn't come from money, but she was the kindest soul I ever met. One day, I invited her to a fancy party my parents were hosting. And do you know what happened?" Ethan shook his head. "They treated her like she didn't belong, like she was less. And Grandma Rose swallowed, her voice tight. "I was so scared of embarrassing my family that I didn't defend her. I let them look down on her, and I lost the best friend I ever had." Ethan's chest tightened. "Grandma," she sighed, "it took me years to understand that money doesn't make you better than anyone, and it took even longer to forgive myself for the way I treated her." Ethan looked away, shame creeping up his spine. "I've been that person, haven't I? The one who looks down on people?" Grandma Rose didn't let him wallow. Instead, she smiled softly. "You were, but now you're changing." Ethan swallowed. "What if I don't fit in anywhere anymore?" Grandma Rose sipped her tea. "That's the thing about growing, sweetheart. You outgrow things, even people." Ethan let those words sink in. Would he outgrow his parents, his friends, the life he had always known? "I don't know how to fix it," he admitted. "You start small," Grandma Rose said. "One choice at a time." Ethan nodded slowly. Maybe it was time to make a different choice. As Ethan got up to leave, Grandma Rose touched his arm. "Do something kind for someone tomorrow," she said. "Something selfless. See how it feels." Ethan thought about that as he drove home. Something kind, something selfless. By the time he pulled into his driveway, he knew exactly what he was going to do. The next morning, Ethan woke up with a different kind of energy. For the first time in his life, He wanted to do something good, not for attention, not for social media, but because it felt right. He got dressed quickly, throwing on a simple hoodie and jeans. No designer labels, no flashy watch, just himself. As he grabbed his car keys, his phone buzzed with a message from his father. "Dad, your mother and I expect you at the country club for lunch. No excuses." Ethan sighed. Not today. Today, he had somewhere else to be. Ethan pulled into the parking lot of the luxury boutique where everything started. It was still early and the store had just opened. Inside, he spotted Maria, the store employee he had insulted the day he mocked Shaq. She was fixing a display, her posture tense, like someone who had spent too much of her life being talked down to. Taking a deep breath, Ethan walked up to her. "Hey, Maria," he said softly. She turned, her eyes narrowing when she saw him. "Oh, it's you." Ethan cleared his throat. I owe you an apology." Maria crossed her arms. "For what? I'm sure you talk to all low-level employees like that, right?" Ethan winced. "I deserve that, but I'm trying to be better." Maria studied him for a long moment. "Why?" Ethan hesitated. "Because I met someone who made me realize how awful I was." Maria raised an eyebrow. "You mean Shaq?" Ethan smiled a little. "Yeah, him. But also, my grandmother." Maria's expression softened at that. "Well," she said after a pause, "apology accepted." Ethan let out a breath he didn't realize he was holding. "But," Maria added, tilting her head, "if you're really trying to be better, you should prove it." Ethan straightened. "How?" Maria smirked. "Ever worked retail before?" That's how Ethan found himself behind the counter of the very store where he had acted like a spoiled brat. But this time, as an employee. Maria handed him an apron. "Let's see if you can handle a few hours of customer service," she said. Ethan chuckled. "Sounds fair." For the next 3 hours, Ethan greeted customers politely, helped people find sizes, dealt with a few rude customers, which gave him a taste of his own medicine, cleaned up after messy, entitled shoppers. By the time his shift ended, he was exhausted. Maria handed him a bottle of water and grinned. "Not so easy, huh?" Ethan shook his head. "I don't know how you do this every day." Maria shrugged. "Some of us don't have a choice." Ethan's stomach twisted at that. He had always had a choice. He just never thought about what it was like for people who didn't. Before leaving, Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out a thick envelope. Maria frowned. "What's that?" "A tip," Ethan said simply, "for putting up with me that day." Maria's eyes widened. "Ethan, this is too much." Ethan smiled. "Not for someone who deserves it." Maria hesitated, then took the envelope. "You're serious about changing, aren't you?" "Yeah," Ethan said, feeling lighter than he had in weeks. "I really am." As Ethan walked out of the store, his phone buzzed. "Dad." "Where are you?" "I just heard the most ridiculous thing." Ethan frowned. Before he could respond, another text came in. "Jake. Dude, why are there pictures of you working retail? Are you okay?" Ethan's heart sank. Someone had taken pictures of him behind the counter. And now his rich friends and his father knew. Shoving his phone into his pocket, Ethan exhaled. He didn't regret what he did, but he had a feeling this was only the beginning of the fallout. Ethan barely made it home before his phone exploded with messages. His group chat was full of shocked reactions. "Ryan. Dude, are you broke? Why are you working at a store?" "Jake. This is a joke, right? Tell me this is some social experiment." "Madison. OMG, my mom just saw the pictures. She asked if you need money. Did WTF is happening?" And then there was his father's message, which was much shorter. "Dad, Come home. Now. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. He had expected this, but it still hit harder than he thought. When Ethan walked into the house, his father was already waiting in the massive, marble-floored living room, arms crossed. Richard Carter, a tall, broad-shouldered man in an expensive navy blue suit, looked every bit the powerful businessman he was. His mother, Victoria Carter, sat stiffly on the edge of the cream-colored couch, her manicured nails tapping anxiously against a crystal glass. "Would you care to explain," Richard said, his voice dangerously calm, "why my son is being photographed working in a store like a common laborer?" Ethan clenched his jaw. "I was apologizing to someone I hurt. I wanted to understand what it was like." Richard's expression darkened. "Understand what, exactly?" Ethan took a deep breath. "What it's like to work a job where people look down on you. What it's like to not have everything handed to you." Richard scoffed. "And what? You suddenly think you're some kind of saint? You think one afternoon in a store makes you a better person?" "I think it's a start," Ethan said evenly. Victoria let out a soft gasp. "Ethan, please, people are talking. The country club." "I don't care about the country club, Mom." Richard took a step closer, his voice lowering. "You should. Do you have any idea how embarrassing this is for our family?" Ethan's fists clenched at his sides. This was exactly the problem. "Embarrassing?" Ethan repeated, his voice rising. "You're more worried about your reputation than whether or not I'm a good person?" Richard's jaw tightened. "We raised you to be successful, to be respected, not to waste time playing poor for fun." Ethan shook his head. "Number you raised me to believe that money makes me better than other people, and I'm done thinking that way." His father's face turned red. "You are being ridiculous." "No," Ethan said firmly. "I'm finally thinking for myself." Richard exhaled sharply, then pointed toward the grand staircase. "Go upstairs, now." Ethan stared at him. "I'm not a child anymore." "Then start acting like a Carter." Ethan let out a humorless laugh. "Maybe I don't want to be the kind of Carter you want me to be." A tense silence filled the room. Victoria's voice wavered. "Ethan, please. We just want what's best for you." Ethan met her gaze. "Then maybe you should try listening to me for once." Without another word, he turned and walked out the front door. Ethan drove without a destination, his mind racing. Eventually, he found himself at his grandmother's house, a cozy, old-fashioned home that smelled like vanilla and cinnamon. He knocked softly on the door. A moment later, Grandma Rose appeared, her sharp blue eyes instantly softening when she saw him. "Ethan," she said warmly, stepping aside. "Come in, sweetheart." The moment he walked inside, the weight on his shoulders felt lighter. His grandmother's house had always been his safe place, a world away from his parents' expectations and the pressures of wealth. He followed her into the kitchen, where she poured him a cup of tea, before sitting across from him at the worn wooden table. Ethan sighed, staring down at his cup. "Dad is furious." Grandma Rose smiled knowingly. "Of course he is. You're challenging everything he believes." Ethan looked up. "Am I wrong?" Rose shook her head. "No, honey. You're just finally seeing the world for what it is." Ethan hesitated. "Then why does it feel so hard?" Rose reached across the table, patting his hand gently. "Because real change is never easy. But the fact that you're willing to go through it, that means something." Ethan swallowed past the lump in his throat. "I don't know what to do next." His grandmother gave him a soft smile. "I think you do. You're just scared." Ethan thought about Shaq, about the charity event, about the people he wanted to help. She was right. He did know. It was time to stop hesitating. It was time to do something real. The next morning, Ethan woke up at Grandma Rose's house, feeling more at peace than he had in a long time. The scent of freshly brewed coffee and homemade biscuits drifted in from the kitchen, mixing with the soft sound of a classic jazz record playing in the background. As he sat up, he spotted a neatly folded note on the nightstand beside him. "Good morning, sweetheart. Breakfast is ready when you are. And remember, bravery isn't about never being afraid. It's about doing the right thing despite the fear. Love, Grandma." Ethan smiled. She always knew what to say. But today, he wasn't going to just think about change. He was going to take action. Ethan sat in the small sunlit kitchen, stirring his coffee. He picked up his phone and stared at Shaq's contact number, the one he had gotten after their conversation at the store. For a moment, doubt crept in. What if Shaq thought he wasn't serious? What if this was all a waste of time? Then he remembered how humiliating it felt to be the guy who had mocked a stranger for no reason. He took a deep breath and sent a message. "Ethan. Hey, Shaq. I know I messed up, but I really want to learn. Can I meet you today? I want to help at the charity event." Seconds later, his phone buzzed. "Shaq. Meet me at my foundation's office at 3 p.m. Let's see what you got, kid." Ethan exhaled. This was happening. At exactly 3 p.m., Ethan pulled up to a modest-looking building in downtown Atlanta. The sign above the entrance read, "Shaq Gives Back, empowering communities one step at a time." Inside, the walls were covered in photos of smiling kids, stories of lives changed, and framed articles about the foundation's impact. Ethan had been in countless luxurious buildings before, but this one felt different. This one had purpose. He spotted Shaq in the main office, dressed in a casual hoodie and sweatpants, looking over some donation forms. When Shaq saw him, he grinned. "Didn't think you'd actually show up," he said. Ethan met his gaze. "I meant what I said. I want to help." Shaq nodded, his expression serious now. "All right then, time to get your hands dirty." For the next few hours, Ethan worked harder than he ever had in his life. He sorted donations, packed meals, and helped organize an upcoming charity basketball game for underprivileged kids. And for the first time, he wasn't thinking about himself. He met people who had lost everything but still kept going. A single mom named Lisa, who worked 2 jobs but still volunteered because she wanted to help others. A former homeless man named Andre, who had been given a second chance through the foundation and was now mentoring struggling teenagers. And the kids, so many kids, who had nothing but still managed to smile. Ethan had lived in luxury his entire life, but these people were richer in ways he had never been. As the sun began to set, Shaq sat on a bench outside the building, wiping sweat from his brow. Ethan dropped down beside him, exhausted, but fulfilled in a way he had never felt before. Shaq handed him a water bottle. "Not bad, kid. You actually worked today." Ethan chuckled, shaking his head. "I think this is the first time I've ever actually done real work." Shaq raised an eyebrow. "How do you feel?" Ethan exhaled. "Like, I don't know, lighter. Like I finally did something that matters." Shaq nodded. "That's because you did." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment. Then Shaq glanced at him. "So, what now?" Ethan hesitated. That was the big question, wasn't it? Did he just go back to his old life? Or did he keep going? He thought about his father, about the backlash, about the risk. Then he thought about Grandma Rose's note that morning. Bravery isn't about never being afraid. It's about doing the right thing despite the fear. Ethan sat up straighter. "I want to do more," he said firmly. "For real this time." Shaq smiled. "Then let's get to work." The next morning, Ethan woke up feeling motivated. For the first time in a long while, he had a purpose. But the moment he unlocked his phone, reality hit him like a truck. His name was trending again, not for something good. The headlines were brutal. Rich kid humiliates Shaq, now playing charity volunteer. Ethan Carter's PR stunt? Can a spoiled teen really change? Shaquille O'Neal dragged into another social media scandal. Ethan's heart pounded as he scrolled through the comments. Yeah, right, he just wants attention. Dude's only helping because he got exposed. Bet his daddy told him to clean up his image. His stomach twisted. This wasn't what he wanted. Just then, a call came in. Dad. Ethan hesitated before answering. Ethan, his father's voice was sharp. What the hell are you doing? Ethan sat on the edge of his bed, gripping the phone. His father, Thomas Carter, was a powerful man, a CEO, someone who hated bad press. You think I didn't see the headlines? Thomas continued. You've embarrassed this family enough. Now you're running around with Shaquille O'Neal like some kind of activist? Ethan clenched his jaw. I'm trying to do something good. This isn't good, Ethan. This is reckless. Our name is a brand, and you're destroying it. Ethan felt his fists tighten. That was the problem, wasn't it? To his dad, their last name mattered more than being a decent person. I don't care about the brand, Ethan said, voice firm. I care about doing something real. A heavy silence filled the line. Then his father's voice turned cold. Come home, now before you make this worse. Ethan took a deep breath. No. He hung up. For the first time in his life, he had defied his father, and it felt right. Ethan sat in the living room staring at the floor. His mind was spinning. He knew this choice would have consequences. Then, a soft voice broke the silence. I heard everything, sweetheart. He turned to see Grandma Rose, standing in the doorway, her eyes filled with both pride and worry. Ethan sighed. I don't know if I did the right thing. Grandma Rose walked over, sitting beside him. She took his hand. You did something most people are too scared to do, she said gently. You stood up for what's right. Ethan swallowed. But what if I fail? What if they're right? What if I'm just a spoiled kid pretending to be better? Grandma Rose gave him a knowing smile. The only way to prove them wrong, Ethan, is to keep going. Her words settled deep in his chest. He wasn't going to stop now. That afternoon, Ethan returned to Shaq's foundation. Shaq was waiting for him, arms crossed. Rough morning? Shaq asked, already knowing the answer. Ethan exhaled. Yeah. Shaq studied him for a moment. And? You giving up? Ethan met his gaze. Number I want to do more. Shaq smirked. Good, 'cause I got something in mind. He handed Ethan a flyer. Youth Mentorship Program, help shape the future. Ethan scanned the details. It was an initiative helping at-risk teens, giving them guidance and opportunities to break the cycle of poverty. Shaq leaned against the desk. You say you want to prove you're serious? Then don't just donate money. Give your time. These kids need someone who's been where they are. Ethan's chest tightened. These kids weren't like him. But maybe that's why it mattered. He nodded. I'm in. Shaq grinned. Then let's get to work. Ethan stood outside Westwood Community Youth Center, staring at the worn-out sign above the entrance. The building wasn't fancy. Faded brick walls, cracked pavement, and a basketball hoop with a bent rim. Nothing like the places he was used to. Shaq patted his shoulder. Nervous? Ethan swallowed. No. Shaq raised an eyebrow. Okay, maybe a little. Shaq chuckled. Good. Means you care. They stepped inside. The gym was loud. Kids running, basketballs bouncing, sneakers squeaking against the floor. At the front desk, a woman in her 40s glanced up. She was tall, with short curly hair and sharp eyes. Shaq, she said, smiling. Finally bringing in some fresh blood? Shaq laughed. Something like that. Ethan, Meet Carmen Diaz. She runs the place. Carmen looked Ethan up and down, unimpressed. So, you the rich boy trying to play hero? Ethan stiffened. I'm just here to help. Carmen didn't look convinced. We'll see. Shaq led Ethan to the basketball court where a group of kids sat on the bleachers. All right, listen up, Shaq said. This is Ethan. He's going to be helping out. The kids looked at Ethan, some whispering to each other. A boy, maybe 14, with buzzed hair and a scar on his cheek, crossed his arms. This some kind of charity project? Ethan hesitated. Yeah, right, the boy muttered. Shaq shot Ethan a look. Handle it. Ethan took a breath. Look, I get why you don't trust me, but I'm here. You don't have to like me, but at least give me a shot. Silence. Then a small voice piped up. You play ball? Ethan turned to see a skinny kid, maybe 12, with oversized sneakers. Ethan smirked. Yeah. You want to go one-on-one? The kid grinned. Bet. Shaq crossed his arms. Oh, this I gotta see. The game started. Ethan dribbled, trying to be smooth. The kid stole the ball immediately. The other kids laughed. Shaq whistled. Oh, Ethan, you gonna let a 12-year-old clown you like that? Ethan grinned. All right, no more playing around. He stepped up his game, but the kid was fast, too fast. On the final point, the kid faked left, spun right, and sank the shot effortlessly. The crowd exploded. Ethan stood there, stunned. Then he laughed. He walked over and held out his fist. You got skills. The kid bumped it. You ain't bad either, for a rich kid. Ethan turned to Shaq, breathing hard. Okay, that was humbling. Shaq grinned. Oh, welcome to the real world. After the game, Carmen pulled Ethan aside. You lasted longer than I thought, she admitted. Ethan wiped sweat from his forehead. So, I passed? Carmen's eyes gleamed. Not yet. She handed him a stack of folders. These are real kids. Their struggles, their stories. If you want to be here, learn who they are. Ethan took the folders. Come back tomorrow, Carmen said. Let's see if you're serious. Ethan looked down at the names on the folders. He had a lot to learn. That night, Ethan sat on his bed, staring at the stack of folders Carmen had given him. His bedroom was nothing like the youth center. Sleek black furniture, a massive TV mounted on the wall, designer sneakers lined up perfectly on shelves. He picked up the first folder. Devin Carter, age 14. Inside was a handwritten note from Carmen. Devin's father is in prison. His mom works 2 jobs. He's got talent, but doesn't trust anyone. Wants to play college ball, but doesn't think he has a shot. Ethan flipped through the next file. Mikey Alvarez, age 12. Mikey's dad left. His older brother is in a gang. He's got a killer crossover, but his grades are slipping. If he doesn't get help, he might go down the same path. Ethan leaned back, exhaling. These weren't just kids playing basketball. They had real struggles. He had never met kids like this before. And tomorrow, he was supposed to help them? For the first time in a long time, Ethan felt nervous. The next afternoon, Ethan walked into the gym. The kids were already there, running drills. Carmen spotted him. Well, you read the files? Ethan nodded. Yeah. Carmen studied him. And? Ethan hesitated. They're dealing with stuff I can't even imagine. Carmen nodded, arms crossed. Exactly. So you got 2 choices. You can feel sorry for them, or you can show them they're worth more than their problems. Ethan thought about that. Then he nodded. I'm ready. Carmen blew her whistle. All right, bring it in. The kids gathered. Carmen gestured to Ethan. He's running drills today. Devin, the 14-year-old with the scar, scoffed. What, rich boy thinks he's a coach now? A few kids laughed. Ethan clenched his jaw. Stay calm. You think you can beat me? Ethan challenged. Devin smirked. Easy. Ethan grinned. Then let's make a deal. If I win, you run extra laps. If you win, I'll do whatever challenge you pick. The kids oohed at the challenge. Devin smirked. Deal. The game started. Devin was fast, but Ethan had been training with Shaq. He kept up, blocking shots, forcing Devin to work for every point. It was tied 9-9 when Devin faked a drive, spun, and drained the final shot. The gym exploded. Ethan wiped his face. Okay, you got me. Devin smirked. All right, rich boy, my challenge? He pointed at a mop and bucket in the corner. Clean the whole gym. The kids laughed. Ethan sighed. Fine. He grabbed the mop and got to work. As he did, he caught Devin watching him, a flicker of respect in his eyes. By the time Ethan finished, it was dark outside. Devin walked up. You actually did it? Ethan shrugged. A deal's a deal. Devin hesitated, then muttered, You ain't bad, rich boy. Carmen smirked from the doorway. Not bad, Ethan, she said. But this was just day one. Ethan nodded, exhausted. He knew he had a long way to go, but for the first time, he felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. The next morning, Ethan arrived at the youth center early. The court was empty except for Shaq, casually tossing free throws. You survived day one, Shaq said, smiling. Ethan smirked. Barely. Shaq grabbed a ball and spun it on his finger. Let me ask you something, E. Why do you think these kids don't trust you yet? Ethan shrugged. Because I'm some rich kid? Shaq nodded. Part of it. But the real reason? They don't think you're sticking around. Ethan frowned. What do you mean? Shaq dribbled. They've seen people come and go. Teachers, mentors, even their own parents. They don't need another guy showing up for a week and disappearing. Ethan exhaled. So how do I change that? Shaq smiled. You show up every day, no matter what. Over the next 2 weeks, Ethan kept coming back. At first, the kids ignored him. Devin barely spoke to him. Mikey rolled his eyes whenever Ethan tried to give advice. One day, after practice, Ethan saw Mikey struggling with his algebra homework. Ethan sat down. Need help? Mikey scoffed. What do you know about algebra? Ethan smirked. Try me. Mikey handed him the paper. Ethan solved the problem in seconds. Mikey's eyes widened. Wait, you're actually smart? Ethan laughed. Yeah, man. You thought I was just a pretty face? Mikey grinned. That was the first time Ethan felt like he was getting through. One evening after practice, Devin was sitting outside alone. Ethan grabbed a water bottle and sat next to him. For a while, neither of them spoke. Finally, Devin muttered, Why are you still here? Ethan sipped his water. Because I want to be. Devin scoffed. Nah, you got some angle. Rich kids like you always do. Ethan frowned. You think I want something? Devin crossed his arms. I think you don't know what struggle is. You don't get what it's like to worry about getting home safe, or if your mom will have enough money for rent. Ethan was quiet. Then he said, You're right. I don't know what that's like. Devin blinked. He hadn't expected Ethan to agree. Ethan continued, But I do know what it's like to feel empty. Devin glanced at him. What do you mean? Ethan stared at the sky. For a long time, I thought money was everything. But I was wrong. I didn't have real friends. I didn't have a purpose. That's why I'm here. Not because I have to be, but because I want to be. Devin was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded. For the first time, Ethan felt like he had earned a little trust. That night, Ethan's phone rang. Grandma rose. He answered, smiling. Hey, Grandma. Her warm voice came through. I saw the pictures from the youth center. I'm proud of you, Ethan. Ethan's heart swelled. Thanks, Grandma. She chuckled. So what's next? Ethan leaned back, thinking. Tomorrow, he had a new challenge, helping the kids prepare for their first real tournament. And for the first time in his life, he was excited for what came next. 2 weeks had passed, and something was changing. The kids at the youth center weren't just tolerating Ethan anymore. They were listening. Even Devin, the hardest one to crack, was starting to respect him. But now came the real test, the upcoming tournament. A local charity event had invited the youth center's team to compete against other community teams. It was their first real game in years, and everyone was nervous, especially Coach Darnell. You guys gotta focus, he said, pacing the court. Ain't nobody taking it easy on you just 'cause we're from the bad neighborhood. We earn our respect, understood? A loud, "Yes, Coach," echoed in the gym. Ethan, standing beside Shaq, watched the team huddle up. Shaq turned to him. This is the part where you step up, E. Ethan raised an eyebrow. Me? I'm not the coach. Shaq smirked. Nah, but you've been in pressure situations before. They need to hear from someone who's been where they are. Ethan hesitated. He wasn't sure if the kids would even listen. But when Shaq pushed him forward, Ethan had no choice. Ethan cleared his throat. The kids were already sweaty from drills, their jerseys soaked through. I know you're nervous, he started, but let me ask you something. Who here has ever been underestimated? Every hand shot up. Ethan nodded. Yeah, me too. People assume things about you. That you're not good enough. That you don't belong. That you'll fail. The gym was silent. Ethan stepped forward. You have two choices. You can believe what they say, or you can prove them wrong. Mikey clenched his fists. Man, I want to prove them wrong. Devin nodded. Yeah. Ethan grinned. Then let's put in the work. The energy shifted. The team was locked in, and Ethan felt something he never had before. Purpose. The next few days were brutal. Coach Darnell wasn't playing around. Morning drills, afternoon workouts, evening strategy sessions. Ethan ran drills with them. He took charges. He got elbowed in the ribs more than once. At first, they laughed. Rich boy ain't built for this, Devin joked. But Ethan kept coming back. By the third day, no one was doubting his commitment. By the fifth, even Devin was passing him the ball. By the seventh, Ethan wasn't just a rich kid anymore. He was one of them. The night before the tournament, Shaq called Ethan over. You've done good, E. Ethan grinned. Thanks, but we still gotta win tomorrow. Shaq chuckled. You'll be fine, but I got a surprise for the team. Ethan raised an eyebrow. What kind of surprise? Shaq smirked. Let's just say, they won't be playing in old ripped jerseys anymore. The youth center was buzzing with excitement. After their unexpected championship win, the entire community came together to celebrate. The gym was decorated with balloons and banners. Kids ran around wearing homemade t-shirts that said Ethan's shot in bold letters. Shaq was at the center of it all, shaking hands and taking pictures. But his eyes were on Ethan. The kid had come a long way. But Shaq knew this was just basketball. The real test was life. A week after the championship, Ethan got a letter from his father, a fancy gold-embossed envelope from Carter Enterprises. Inside was an invitation. Ethan, your place in the company awaits you. Come home. It was what he had always wanted, to be part of his family's empire. But now, he wasn't sure anymore. That night, Ethan knocked on Shaq's office door at the youth center. Shaq was sitting at his desk watching old game tapes. Got a minute? Ethan asked. Shaq muted the screen. Always. Ethan sat down, took a deep breath. My dad wants me back. He's offering me a position in the company." Shaq studied him. "And?" "I don't know if I want it." Shaq leaned back. "Why?" Ethan hesitated. "Because for the first time, I feel like I'm doing something that matters. I help the team. I help the kids. I actually like who I am here." Shaq nodded. "That's good. But," Ethan rubbed his face, "if I don't go back, I'm turning my back on my family." Shaq chuckled. "You're not turning your back on anyone. You're just choosing your own path." Ethan swallowed. That's what scared him. The next morning, Ethan woke up to an unexpected guest. Grandma Rose. She was sitting in the youth center lounge, sipping tea, dressed in her elegant but simple floral dress. "I heard you're having trouble deciding," she said as he sat down beside her. Ethan sighed. "I don't know what to do, Grandma." She smiled softly. "I do." Ethan looked at her. "You do?" She nodded. "You've spent your whole life trying to please your father, trying to fit into a world that never felt right to you. But here, you've changed. You've grown. That tells me something." "What?" "That this isn't just about basketball. This is about who you want to be." Ethan looked down. "But what if I fail?" Grandma Rose squeezed his hand. "Then you pick yourself up, like you did after that first game, like you did when Shaq pushed you, like you've done every time life tested you." Ethan felt a lump in his throat. His whole life, he had been afraid of failing. But maybe failing was part of learning. Maybe failing meant he was actually trying. The next day, Ethan walked into Shaq's office. Shaq looked up from his desk. "What's up?" Ethan took a deep breath. "I'm staying." Shaq smiled. But Ethan wasn't done. "I don't want to just work at the youth center. I want to run it someday. I want to help kids the way you helped me." For the first time, Shaq looked genuinely surprised. Then he nodded. "Good. Then let's get to work." And just like that, Ethan Carter found his purpose. 5 years later, the youth center had expanded. More kids, more programs, more lives changed. And at the heart of it all, Ethan Carter, the new director. He had gone from a spoiled rich kid to a mentor, a leader, a man with purpose. One day, he stood at the entrance, watching a new kid walk in, young, arrogant, with a chip on his shoulder. Ethan smiled, because he knew exactly what that kid needed. And now, he was ready to teach. Guys, thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this story. Let us know about your thoughts in the comments section. Also, subscribe the channel for daily stories notification.